And wrapping up today's event, we have Keith Townsend with the CTO Advisor. Keith, thank you for joining us today.
Scott, good to see you, and thanks for having me.
Now, obviously, the Chief Technology Officer or CTO role is aspirational for a lot of IT people, and there's lots of different ways we can get to that role. Why don't you give us an overview of what a CTO actually does? And then we'll talk about some different ways that people get into a role like that.
So, I get this question an awful lot, Scott, because people confuse the CIO role, which you've been in your past, and the CTO role. And then they'll look at someone like you. You're fairly technical, but a CIO doesn't necessarily have to be technical. A CTO is that main executive that aligns the business objectives to the actual technology architecture. So if you can think of a enterprise architect, but in a much more executive role, he can be a single contributor in one sense of the phase, and then he could have a staff in another sense of the phase. So there's different variations, but the core of it is that this is a C-level role that is very, very much focused on the bits and speeds and feeds and the technology itself. Then you have two different paths that we can get into. There's the vendor CTO, and then there's the enterprise IT CTO.
Yeah, let's start with the enterprise IT side of things, since that's where the brunt of the audience is going to be. But I'd like to talk about vendor side as well, because I'm sure there's people in the audience that'll be interested in working for a vendor at some point. But we think about the enterprise IT side. What's a typical pathway? Like, where do people start? How do they progress in their career? What kind of education do they need? Certifications, knowledge, skills, experience to get from basically point A to point CTO?
So let's talk about the really hard part first. And this is the part that I get a lot of questions on, which is the non-technical skill. Basically, you need to be able to map what you're doing from a technology perspective to the business objective. Let's say that you're a manufacturing company and take a part of my career. You manufacture highway safety products, and you support an engineering staff. You support a back office accounting staff, et cetera, et cetera. You need to be able to zoom out, see that big picture, align that to the technology paths you're taking, whether it's deciding, whether or not to use, in my case, back in the day, frame relay or MPLS, and how that impacts the accounting side of the house and how that enables the actual technology, but being able to go in front of the CEO of a small publicly traded company and make the argument for that. So first off, it's the business skill, and you need to be able to acquire that business skill. There's, I think, two ways to do that. One, you can go back to school, get an MBA, or in my case, I got a master's of IT project management because I already had the technical skill and I had already done some management work. So I didn't want to have too much of a focus in business. Or you can do a stint in a non-IT role. You can take on a BCDR role where you're talking to the business as a analyst and understanding the applications and the various interconnections with the business and operations. Or you can, go the extreme route, which I did, was to go to one of the big four consulting companies that's always looking for deep technical talent and willing to teach the business side.
Yeah, and I think whether it's a CIO or CTO role, understanding the business is imperative, and that's I see. I see a lot of IT people that don't always want to look at that side of things. They're very, very invested in the technology, but they're not always understanding or appreciative of what that is actually supporting. And I think those people who take an interest in understanding sort of what the technology bits and bytes are supporting are going to have a much more successful pathway in front of them than ones that are just focused on the bits and the bytes, which is not to say that's bad. Some people just have different interests and different skills. So if I'm in an admin role right now, what is short of going to get an MBA? Are there things I can do internally to begin to gain the skills that I need to be able to become a CTO?
Absolutely. You can do some basic things like just talk to users. we IT people, you know, we like to do what we do, whether we're doing it in a tobacco company or manufacturer or finance services company. We kind of like to do what we do. And that's perfecting being a V admin, being a Kubernetes admin, being a developer. But in reality, what we do supports the business. And we have people at the end of the services. The simplest thing to do is just go talk to those people, get interested in what they do and how technology enables or hinders their job.
So if we look at the technology side of things, so we focused on understanding the business. What technology capabilities do I need to have as a CTO? Do I need to be getting at the command line to all of my switches? I mean, what kind of technology skills, experience, and should I have in my belt, and what will I be doing day to day?
And this is where the job slightly differs between the vendor CTO and the enterprise CTO. The enterprise CTO is typically extremely well-rounded. They understand application development. They understand networking, storage, compute, governance, super important. So, you know, compliance, change management, configuration management. You need to be extremely well-rounded because you're looking at the big picture. You understand why Kubernetes matters to an application development team, but also why it wouldn't matter as much to someone supporting COS apps. You understand like big picture, what would be EVPN, VXLAN, but not necessarily how to configure any of it. It doesn't hurt to be a domain expert in one of these matters, but you definitely want to understand the big picture because you stitch, just like an enterprise architect, you stitch it all together between the teams. Versus a vendor CTO, you're probably going to be pretty technical. You're probably going to still be an application developer, or you're going to know the product in which you sell extremely well to the point that you probably know you can probably get to do some of the code review, etc. Day to day, what are you doing day to day? Day to day, again, it's less about getting into the technical weeds and more about managing relationships. If you're transforming into a DevOps operation, what does that mean for the SAP team and the roadmap? Depending on the size of the organization, you may be creating that roadmap for each individual silo. For a larger organization, you may be coordinating between the teams, the application development team, the operations teams, the architecture teams, et cetera, and just providing that vision and map, and honestly been in a whole lot of meetings.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, on the enterprise IT side, and I want to go back to the vendor side just a second. Basically, if I'm a CTO, I don't need to understand every single basically function, feature, nuance of every single device out there. It's better for me to understand the primary features and the interrelationships between all the technology, to understand how to bring it all together as a big puzzle to create a beautiful picture for the organization. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. You need to understand, more importantly, how to triage, because that's a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
What's important for you to understand, what's important for others to understand, and what's important for you to simply just outsource. Like, we're seriously getting to the point that we should be questioning, should we dedicate resources to internal resources for managing something like vSphere?
Right.
Is that important versus having staff learn Kubernetes or cloud technologies in general? I'm not a big, proponent of Kubernetes everywhere, but I am a big proponent of the small things that don't differentiate in your business. And again, this is where it goes to the business skill. Is having staff that knows vSphere down to the VCDX level or even VCP level, helping my organization move the ball versus my competitors or the rest of the industry. If it's not, how do I get that skill and that capability within my organization without having my people focus on it?
Let's talk to the vendor CTO side as we wrap up our discussion here. What's the genesis of a vendor CTO in comparison to an enterprise IT CTO?
So actually, there's two types of vendor CTOs. You might realize or seen the title field CTO, which is more of a sales marketing role,
Yep.
in which you're just going out and you're talking to end users, looking at their environment, helping them decide on what technologies and technology stack to sell you. Almost always what we call carry a bag, meaning that you have some type of quota, whether it's number of customers to meet, overall sales of the organization, but it's a sales focused organization. When you think about technical CTO, I think it's someone like Matt Wallace over at Faction Inc., who actually is helping develop the product. He's talking to the product development team, he's talking to customers, he's talking to partners, and he's understanding the market need and helping to shape the product. He may not actually code the product, but he has his finger on the pulse and his hand on and his foot on the scales and helping to direct the product, the product development.
So Keith, this was a great discussion, and what it really conveys to me is that if I'm an IT person with a CTO goal in my future, there's a lot of different ways I can get there. There's a lot of different pathways. It's just all going to take a different set of skills than maybe I've used up to this point to get to the admin or engineer level of my career. And it's going to mean a more focus on the business. If you're looking at the vendor side, understanding product, and also understanding potentially marketing, like to your point about field CTOs. So it seems like it's a pretty exciting. I mean, it's kind of exciting when you think about it. I mean, sort of the sky's the limit when you think about this kind of a role.
Yeah, I'm just as overwhelmed from when I got my MCP Windows 95 and thinking about where could that take my career and where could I go. I was just mentoring someone earlier today, and they said, one of my employees, and they were like, man, I can go anywhere. Help me understand where to go. I'm like, you know what? Where's your passion? Because just like technology, you can literally go in any direction. The same thing with the CTO role. You can follow your passions outside of just technology, almost anywhere it takes you. And it's always worthwhile, the journey.
Keith, thank you so much for joining us for today's IT career event.
Scott, thanks for having me. Good luck to everyone. If anybody has any questions for me, DMs are open at CTO Advisor.
I was going to say that. Thank you so much.